It was close to midnight when the city began to breathe again. Rain glazed the windows of the studio, turning the neon signs outside into trembling reflections. Every drop felt like a metronome, marking the rhythm of a heart that refused to quiet down. I sat before the microphone, alone. The red light above me blinked. On air. To most people, it meant I was live. To me, it meant I had nowhere left to hide. My name is Clea Lin, host of Midnight Letters, a radio show, where strangers send me stories they're too afraid to say aloud. But tonight, the story wasn't from them. It was mine. I took a breath. Tonight's dedication, I said softly, is for someone who once believed that music could heal everything. A pause. My fingers trembled against the table. And maybe, I whispered, I believed it too. For 3 years, I had kept his name off the air, buried under playlists and jingles and perfectly rehearsed smiles. But grief is strange, doesn't fade, it waits. And that night, something inside me gave in. Chase, I said. The name slipped out like a confession. The syllables felt foreign on my tongue, too sacred, too heavy. He used to sit across from me in this very room, back when the world still made sense. Chase, or Pei Xingchuan as he signed his demo files, was the sound engineer who built the pulse of Midnight Letters. He had a way of making silence beautiful, of finding melody even in the hum of broken cables. He once told me, a perfect mix isn't about loudness, Clea. It's about balance, how two sounds can meet and never drown each other out. Maybe that was what love was supposed to be. But balance was something we lost long ago. When his white moonlight returned to Lara, the singer who had once shared his studio, his stage, his everything, he drifted back to her orbit, like a man remembering who he was before me. And I just kept the show running, pretending my world wasn't unraveling. I remember the last time I saw him here. He was packing up his cables, head lowered. I need to go where the music takes me, he said. Then go, I answered, my voice steady only because my heart wasn't. He smiled once soft, apologetic, and walked out into the rain. I never heard from him again, until tonight, because tonight, his song was playing in every cafe, every taxi, every heart that once tuned in to Midnight Letters. And I couldn't pretend anymore. So I broke the rule. I said his name on air. And as soon as I did, I felt something shift in the room, like static warming into memory. Maybe he was listening. Maybe not. But if he was, I wanted him to hear what the city had been hearing for 3 years. The sound of a woman who kept loving him through silence. The rain hadn't stopped by morning. It fell in thin silvery threads across the city, washing the neon dust from the rooftops. Manhattan looked half drowned, as if the whole skyline had forgotten how to breathe without him too. I hadn't slept. I never do on nights when my voice shakes on air. The studio's red lights still flickered in my mind every time I closed my eyes, and I could still hear his name echoing through my own broadcast. Chase. It lingered in the back of my throat, bittersweet as the first sip of cold coffee. The apartment was quiet, except for the turntable spinning in the corner. The same vinyl had been looping since last night. Midnight Letters theme, Demo 01. He recorded it the day we finished our first pilot episode. The melody was incomplete, fading just before it could resolve, like someone cutting a sentence short because they're afraid of the ending. He'd leaned over my shoulder that night, adjusting the knobs. This one's not perfect, he said, but neither are we. I laughed. I didn't know that would become our prophecy. The record skipped slightly, a scratch in the same place as always, a small hiccup before the music caught itself again. That tiny imperfection was him. It reminded me of his smile, the kind that showed a hint of hesitation before it melted into warmth. God, how I used to think that skip made the song human. Now, it just made it hurt. I poured another cup of coffee. Bitter, black, no sugar. That's how he used to drink it, said it kept him honest. I had tried to stop copying his habits, but it's strange how grief makes you a mimic. You start carrying their ghosts in the small things. The coffee, the music, the pauses between breaths. At noon, my producer called. Clea, what did you do last night? Her voice half joking, half worried. You're trending. That moment when you said, you'll know who you are. Everyone's convinced you meant Chase. My chest tightened. I tried to sound calm. Let them guess. I didn't name names. Still, she said softly, people hear what they want to hear. I smiled to myself, a tired smile that no one could see. Yes, they always do. And some of us still hear voices that aren't even there anymore. After I hung up, I went back to the turntable. The record had stopped spinning, the needle resting at the edge, silent. I stared at it for a long time. Maybe love ends like this, not with the final note, but with the quiet hum after the music's gone. That evening I went back to the studio early. The world outside was drowned in rain again, the streets shining like ribbons of mercury. I sat before the microphone and didn't turn on the red light. Instead, I just listened to the hum of the air conditioner, the faint ticking of the clock, the static in the silence. If I closed my eyes, I could almost imagine him there again. Chase, adjusting the sliders, his sleeves rolled up, his breath warm against my ear as he whispered, "Don't rush your sentences, Clea. The pauses are where the truth hides." And so I spoke into the darkness, quietly, without recording. "Chase, I still remember how you breathed between notes. I still time my silences to yours." The rain outside grew heavier, tapping against the window like fingers asking to be let in. But I didn't move. For the first time in years, I let myself cry. And the sound of my own voice breaking, was the most honest broadcast I'd ever made. The city never really sleeps, but some nights it feels quieter than death. 2 days after that broadcast, I was driving home through Soho, wipers dragging across a windshield smeared with leftover rain. The streetlights flickered in the puddles like dying stars, and the car radio hummed low, just background noise to keep me company. Until I heard her voice, Alara. It started softly, a hush of breath over a piano I knew too well. A note, then another, the exact progression I'd once written down on a napkin in Chase's studio, back when we used to stay up till sunrise, mixing songs that no one would ever hear. But this time, the world was hearing it. Her voice floated like fog through the speakers, delicate and warm, the kind of tone that sounds like forgiveness, even when it's not. And beneath her words was his piano, low pulsing, heartbreakingly familiar. Every note was a memory I didn't consent to remember. That song used to be ours. Now, it was a love letter to someone else. I pulled the car over, hand pressed to my chest, trying to breathe past the weight of nostalgia. People think betrayal is loud, shouting, slamming doors, broken glass. But this kind of betrayal, it's a whisper that sounds exactly like the past. He had once told me, if I ever write a song about love, you'll be the first to hear it. And he kept that promise, I suppose. I was the first to hear it, only it wasn't mine anymore. When the chorus swelled, I reached for the radio knob, fingers shaking. I turned it off. The silence that followed felt heavier than the song. Silence always does, when it comes after something beautiful. That night, during my show, I couldn't find my voice. The letters I read felt hollow. Every word tasted like someone else's language. Halfway through, I almost stopped the recording. But then a listener's message blinked on the screen. How do you let go of someone who still lives in your music? I stared at it for a long time. Then, without thinking, I whispered into the mic. Maybe you don't. Maybe you just change the station. And just as I finished the sentence, I heard it. A faint crackle, static, breaking through the frequency. Then a voice. Clea, it was so soft I almost thought it was my imagination. A trick of the air. Maybe feedback from another studio. But no. That tone, that hesitation between syllables. I knew it too well. It was him. For a moment, the room tilted. The lights flickered, the soundboard hissed, and my pulse drowned everything else out. I whispered back, before I could stop myself. Chase. No answer. Just static. The kind of sound that sits between reality and a dream. When the broadcast ended, I replayed the audio file twice. No trace of his voice. No proof at all. Only the hum of the city, and my own heartbeat. But deep down, I knew. Frequencies have memory. Sometimes, the past finds a way to tune itself back in. By the end of that week, her face was everywhere. Ilara, the name that used to be just another ghost in Chase's stories, was suddenly flesh and light again. She smiled from billboards, magazine covers, subway screens. Everywhere I turned, she was there, and beside her, always, was him. Chase looked different now. He had the same quiet eyes, the same uncertain half-smile, but success has a way of softening the edges of guilt. He looked lighter, and I wondered, for a cruel second, if letting me go had given him that weightlessness. The headlines were merciless. The reunion we've been waiting for. Ilara and Chase return with a song that redefines love. Their chemistry is timeless. I told myself I wouldn't look. But at 2 a.m., under the blue glow of my laptop, I did. I watched the interview, fingers clenched around a mug of stale coffee. The host leaned forward, beaming. So tell us, Chase, what's it like working with Ilara again after all these years? Ilara laughed first, that soft, lilting sound I used to hear through the glass when she'd visit the studio. Then Chase spoke. Some stories don't end, he said. They just wait for the right note to return. I felt something inside me fold quietly in half. Because that's what I had been doing for 3 years, waiting for the right note. And it finally came. Only it wasn't meant for me. I closed the laptop. The city outside was still awake. Sirens, car horns, laughter seeping through the walls. But inside, there was only that one sentence, circling in my head like a curse. Some stories don't end. I didn't sleep. Instead, I went up to the rooftop before dawn. The skyline was gray, soft, the kind of light that makes everything look like a memory. I lit a cigarette for the first time in months. The smoke curled up, fragile and temporary. Just like us. He used to hate it when I smoked. Clea, he'd say, you have a voice people could fall asleep to. Don't ruin it for someone who needs it. At the time, I thought he meant the audience. Now I know he was talking about himself. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I heard your show last night. You still breathe between sentences. No name. No punctuation. But my heart knew before my mind did. Chase. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the keyboard. For a second, I thought of everything I could say. I miss you. I hate you. Why now? Instead, I typed 3 words. Wrong number, sorry. I hit send before I could stop myself. The phone stayed still for a long time after that, like it was holding its breath with me. When the sun finally rose, it fell across the city in gold and quiet. Somewhere, I imagined him staring at his own phone, reading my message. Maybe he smiled. Maybe he didn't. Either way, I knew this time, he'd be the one listening in silence. There are sounds that never leave you. Some are soft, like the whisper of fingertips brushing over piano keys. Others are sharper, like the click of a studio door closing for the last time. And then there are the ones that live in between. Those small, imperfect noises that only love can make. That's what I kept hearing that week. The echoes between what was said and what was lost. It began when I found an old hard drive in my desk drawer. A silver one, with a strip of tape across it, handwritten, mix_archive_C+ch. I hadn't touched it since he left. I plugged it in. The screen flickered, and folders appeared like ghosts. Inside were hours of recordings, rehearsals, laughter, half-finished tracks. Each one labeled with dates that no longer meant anything to anyone but me. I clicked the first file, static. Then his voice. Okay, Clea, let's try it again, slower this time. Pretend the mic is someone you still trust. My throat tightened. I remembered that night. We had been recording a test promo for Midnight Letters. The studio lights were dim, our coffee had gone cold, and he had removed his headphones, saying, "Trust is a sound, you know. You can hear when someone means what they say." I'd laughed then. He'd smiled. That was before everything began to unravel. The second clip was from a few weeks later, the day of the power outage. A storm had hit the city, lightning cracking right above the station. We'd been mixing a track when the room went dark. I remember fumbling in the shadows, reaching for the same switch he did, our hands brushing, and the sudden spark that wasn't from electricity. In the darkness, he said something I'll never forget. If the world ever goes silent, I hope your voice is the last thing I hear. The lights came back a few seconds later, but something inside me stayed dark. because I never knew if he meant it, or if it was just one of those lines people say when they mistake intensity for love. The third clip was unfinished, a recording labeled untitled _track _Clea _takey. It started with the sound of a chair scraping, a deep sigh, then his piano again, slower this time, heavier, and under it, faintly, my voice humming the melody. We never finished that song. He said he'd come back to it later. He never did. I sat there for hours, listening to our ghosts. The static between clips sounded almost alive, like the machine was breathing with me, remembering for me. At one point, I pressed my palms to my ears, but it didn't help, because the noise wasn't outside, it was inside. The static was memory, and memory doesn't fade when you hit stop. The next day, I carried the hard drive to the station. I told myself I'd return it to storage, maybe even delete it. Instead, I found myself slipping it into the mixing console, playing one of the old sessions through the studio monitors. The air filled with our laughter, our test takes, our mistakes, and then that one sentence again. Pretend the mic is someone you still trust. I leaned toward the microphone, eyes closed, heart trembling, and whispered back, I did. The next few nights blurred together in shades of insomnia and rain. I kept the old recordings close, like a wound I refused to let heal. Every time I tried to sleep, my mind replayed the fragments, the laughter, the static, the unfinished song we never named. He had always said names were powerful. That's why songs without titles hurt the most, Chase once told me, because they still belong to someone, we just can't say who. I used to think he was talking about his music. Now I knew he meant me. On Wednesday, I arrived early at the studio. The station was empty, humming faintly with the ghost of last night's broadcasts. I sat at the console, placed my hands on the same faders he once touched, and played the untitled track again. The piano notes fell like slow rain, each one pausing just before it should have resolved, and under it, my voice humming, trembling, unfinished. Something in me cracked open. I pressed record. For the first time in years, I sang again. Not for the listeners, not for him, but for myself. I didn't have words, only sounds. I let them spill, raw and cracked, until the pain started sounding like melody again. When the track ended, I sat in silence. And that silence, that breathless pause, was louder than any applause I'd ever received. Later that evening, the show went live. I didn't have the energy for the usual cheerful script. Instead, I spoke softly, like reading a secret into the dark. Tonight's letter, I began, comes from someone who writes, what if someone steals your melody, the one you built your heart around? Do you forgive them, or do you stop singing? I looked at the red light, glowing like a pulse. My reflection in the studio glass looked fragile, almost transparent. I think, I said, voice breaking. Sometimes you forgive them anyway. Not because they deserve it, but because you can't live your whole life holding one note. For a moment I thought I saw movement behind the glass wall, a silhouette, tall, familiar, motionless. But when I blinked, it was gone. After the show, I stepped outside. The rain had stopped, but the air smelled of thunder. I walked down the street, the city glistening like a photograph left in the dark room too long. In the window of a closed cafe, a small speaker was still playing the same song. Their song, the one Chase made for Ella. Only now, I noticed something I hadn't before. Hidden beneath her voice, buried deep in the mix, was a second harmony. My voice, not the whole phrase, just a breath, one hum, one syllable. It was the untitled track, ours. He hadn't deleted it. He had hidden it underneath hers. I stood there for a long time, watching my reflection blur in the rain-streaked glass, feeling anger and grief and something cruelly close to love, all at once. When the last note faded, I whispered, you always knew how to keep me in your songs. And maybe that was his way of saying sorry. Or maybe it was just another verse in a melody that was never meant to end. The night he came back, the city was heavy with fog. The kind that swallows sound, the kind that turns everything into memory. I was alone in the studio again. It was past midnight, the world between one day and the next. Rain brushed faintly against the glass, and the on-air sign glowed like a heartbeat, refusing to fade. I had just finished reading a letter on the show. A listener had written, "Sometimes I think love isn't about staying. It's about who you still talk to in your head when no one else is listening." When I turned off the mic, I caught my reflection in the window. Tired eyes, a voice too soft to belong to someone who used to believe in forever. That's when the studio door clicked open. I didn't need to look. I knew that rhythm, the hesitation between steps. The way the air changed when he entered a room. Clea. Just my name, nothing else. It was almost enough to break me. He stood there half soaked from the rain, holding a vinyl sleeve in his hand. Same gray coat, same eyes that always looked like they were apologizing for something he hadn't said yet. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. He looked exactly like a memory. Only this one was standing right in front of me. "I didn't think you'd still be here," he said quietly. "I didn't think you'd still know where here was," I replied. He smiled, that small, uneven smile I used to live for. "I heard your broadcast. The letter about melodies. I thought maybe what?" I interrupted. "Maybe it was about me." I let out a sound that wasn't quite laughter. It wasn't. "Not everything broken in my life is about you, Chase." He flinched, not much, but enough. Silence filled the room again, thick and breathing. Then he set the vinyl down on the console. The label was blank. "Just white." "I finished it," he said. "The song we never named. The one from that night." I stared at it, the record that had lived as a ghost in both our heads. He went on. "I didn't know what to call it. Until last week. I called it Clea." Something inside me twisted, sharp and soft at once. I wanted to scream, to cry, to laugh at the irony. How he always remembered too late. He stepped closer. "You were never a background voice. You were the reason I wrote anything at all." "Stop." My voice cracked. "Don't rewrite history for me." "You left. For her?" His expression broke. "Ilara's gone," he said. "She left before the tour started. Said I was still writing songs for someone else." He looked at me then, really looked. She was right. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the rain and the faint hum of the city. Then he whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't understand sooner." I took a breath. There was a time I would have given anything to hear those words. Now they just sounded like closure arriving too late. "Chase," I said softly, "you can't apologize for timing. The world doesn't wait for us to be ready." He looked down. The vinyl sleeve trembled slightly in his hands. "Can I play it for you?" he asked. I nodded, because some ghosts deserve to speak once more before they fade. He placed the record on the turntable. The needle dropped, and music bloomed, familiar, tender, unbearably human. It was the same melody from years ago. But now there were words. And the first line, the one that broke me, was this. "She taught me that silence is not the absence of love, but the sound of it leaving." I closed my eyes. The rain outside softened, and I realized I wasn't crying. I was finally letting go. When the song ended, he asked, "Do you forgive me?" I smiled, almost kindly. "I do, but not for you." "For me?" I turned off the on-air sign, grabbed my coat, and walked out into the rain. Behind me his voice broke once more, a whisper barely louder than the static. "You'll always be the song I couldn't finish." And for the first time, I didn't turn back. The days after that night felt unreal, like living inside a song that had already ended. The city carried on, taxis honked, people hurried, rain fell and dried, but everything around me sounded muted, like someone had turned down the volume of the world. I didn't see Chase again. Not at the station, not in the coffee shops we used to haunt, not even in the reflections of passing windows where I half expected him to appear. He was gone again, this time, quietly. And I wasn't sure whether to be relieved or hollow. The vinyl he'd left behind sat on my table. CLEA, the name printed in tiny letters along the edge of the label. I never played it again. It felt too final. Too much like pressing play on an ending I wasn't ready to hear twice. Instead, I went back to the studio every night, hosting my show as if nothing had changed, reading letters from strangers who loved too much, apologized too little, and kept waiting for people who never tuned back in. Some nights when the station was empty, and the red light flickered weakly, I'd imagine him still out there listening maybe, or just driving through the city with the radio off, carrying the silence we both created. Then, one evening, I found something in my mailbox. A small envelope, no return address. Inside was a cassette tape. No note, just a single line written in his handwriting across the label. For the nights you couldn't sleep. I stared at it for a long time before I dared play it. When I finally did, the tape hissed, then filled with faint sounds, rain on a window, soft piano keys, the hum of old radio static. And beneath all that, his voice. Clea, if you're hearing this, it means I didn't stay. I wanted to, but I think some people are meant to be echoes. Close enough to remind you of what was real, far enough not to ruin it. He paused, breath trembling through the tape. You once said, silence is heavier after something beautiful. I think I finally understand that. I didn't come back to ask you to start over. I came back so I could let you go right this time. The tape clicked to an end, leaving only the quiet whir of the reels turning. I sat there until it stopped completely. No tears, no collapse. Just a stillness that felt almost kind. That night on the show, I didn't read any letters. I didn't play any songs. I just spoke softly, honestly, for once not to the city, but to him. Some stories don't end. They fade like radio waves drifting out over the ocean. Never truly gone, just waiting for someone far away to catch them. I paused. If you're listening, Chase, I heard you, and I'm okay. I turned off the mic. The studio fell silent, but the quiet didn't hurt anymore. Outside, the fog was lifting. Dawn painted the sky pale blue, and for the first time in years, I walked home without looking back. The night of my final show arrived quietly, the way endings often do, without fanfare, without warning, just the faint click of a clock striking midnight. 3 years of midnight letters had come down to this one last hour. The station felt emptier than ever. Most of the staff had already gone home. Only the soft hum of old equipment kept me company. I'd rehearsed my farewell message 100 times, but when the red light blinked on air, the words refused to come. Instead, I just breathed. Good evening, I began softly, and good night for the last time for midnight letters. My voice trembled, not from nerves, from knowing I was saying goodbye to the version of myself that once believed love could be preserved through sound. I started this show 3 years ago, I continued, because I thought if I collected enough stories from strangers, maybe I'd find one that ended right. But I never did. Because maybe the beauty of love isn't in its happy ending. It's in the echo it leaves behind. I paused. The silence pressed against the glass walls, heavy and alive. Outside, rain began to fall again, as if the sky knew how to cue itself to my story. I reached into my bag and took out the cassette tape, the one he had sent me. For the nights you couldn't sleep. I placed it beside the microphone, its plastic case cold under my fingertips. This song, I said quietly, was sent to me by someone who once believed we could fix each other with music. Maybe we couldn't. But maybe we did what we were meant to do. We kept each other alive long enough to learn how to be alone. My throat tightened. I pressed play. The familiar hiss filled the air, followed by that soft piano, the heartbeat of the tape turning in slow rhythm. For a few seconds, I didn't speak. I just listened. Clea, his recorded voice whispered. Thank you for every silence you filled. I smiled a small, sad smile that no one could see. Then I spoke, voice barely above the music. And thank you, Chase, for teaching me that some goodbyes don't have to sound like endings. The on-air light flickered as the tape spun to its end. No applause, no calls, no letters. Just the sound of the reels slowing down, and the quiet heartbeat of an empty room. When the tape clicked off, I leaned toward the mic one last time. To everyone who's ever written to midnight letters, may you find someone who listens the way you've learned to speak. This is Clea Lynn, signing off. I switched off the red light. The studio fell into stillness, the kind of silence that doesn't ache anymore. As I gathered my things, I noticed a figure outside the glass wall. Tall, still, familiar. For a heartbeat, I thought it was him. But when I stepped closer, it was only a reflection, mine, fading in the dim light. I smiled at it. For once, it didn't look lonely. I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, the last line of the tape repeated faintly through the speakers, a loop, quiet as breath. She taught me that silence could be beautiful. Then the room went still. A year has passed since Midnight Letters went off the air. The station replaced my time slot with a finance talk show, pragmatic voices discussing numbers and futures instead of love and ghosts. Sometimes, when I drive past the old building, I still see the red light glowing faintly through the window. It's never my voice behind it now, but part of me always listens anyway. Life has become quieter, not empty, just slower. I moved to a smaller city upstate, where mornings smell like bread and coffee instead of rain and metal. I walked to work at a local community radio station. No sponsors, no scripts, just simple broadcasts for a handful of people who still believe that voices can keep them company in the dark. They call my new show Morning Letters. Same idea, different hour. I start each episode by reading one small note, then a song that feels like sunrise. It's not glamorous, but it's real. And for the first time, I don't talk about heartbreak, I talk about beginning again. Sometimes I still think of him, not with pain anymore, but with a kind of soft gratitude, like remembering an old song you used to hum without realizing. Chase, the man who taught me that silence has its own rhythm. I never heard from him again after that tape. But one afternoon, about 6 months ago, an envelope arrived. No return address again. Inside, a single photograph. It was of a recording studio somewhere by the ocean. The caption on the back, written in his handwriting, simply said, "I finally finished the song." No signature. No explanation. Just the sound of closure I didn't know I needed. Now every morning before my show, I play one of my own recordings, the new version of Untitled Track. It has words now. Not about him, not about loss, but about how love doesn't end when people do. Sometimes, as I speak into the mic, I imagine the radio waves traveling far beyond the hills, drifting over highways, cities, and seas. Maybe somewhere out there, in a quiet car, on an empty road, he's listening. Maybe not. Either way, it doesn't hurt to hope. This morning, as the clock struck 8, I adjusted the mic and smiled. "Good morning," I said softly. "This is Morning Letters." Today's letter says, "How do you know when it's time to stop waiting?" I paused, letting the silence stretch, the kind of silence he once said was where truth hides. "I think," I said, "you don't stop waiting. You just realize that some people never really left. They simply changed frequencies." I leaned closer, almost whispering. "To whoever is listening out there, thank you for staying tuned." The red light blinked. Outside, the sky turned gold, a new day began, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally broadcasting from a place called peace.